My daughter stood at the front of the reception hall, holding a glass of white wine like she was about to give a toast at a wedding, not a reception following my husband's funeral. She smiled at the 43 people seated around her, most of them my husband's colleagues, our neighbours from 30 years, the couple from our church who brought us soup every winter. She smiled at all of them and said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, that I had already agreed to sign the house over to her, that I was too overwhelmed to manage a property that size, that it was the right thing, that my husband would have wanted it. I was sitting 4 feet away from her, still wearing the black dress I had pressed that morning before I buried the man I loved for 41 years. I had not agreed to anything. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. My hands, folded in my lap, went cold. Then a woman near the back of the room set down her coffee cup and stood up slowly. She wore a grey blazer and had the kind of stillness that made people pay attention without her raising her voice. She looked at my daughter and said, "That document was not signed voluntarily, and I think everyone in this room should know that before this goes any further." The room went silent in a way that felt like all the air had been pulled out. My daughter's smile did not disappear immediately. It froze first, then it cracked, and the woman in the grey blazer looked at me with something I had not felt since my husband took his last breath 2 days before. She looked at me like I mattered, like I was still a person and not just a problem to be managed. "My name is Eleanor Hayes. I am 67 years old. I was a high school English teacher for 32 years. I retired 4 years ago because my husband, Bernard, was diagnosed with a heart condition and I wanted to be home with him. We lived in the same white colonial house in Cedarbrook, Ohio, for 28 years. We painted the shutters together. We planted the garden together. We raised our daughter, Renee, in that house and gave her every good thing we had. The day Bernard died, Renee called me before I even called her. I do not know how she found out so fast. The hospital had barely finished their paperwork. She arrived within the hour, her husband, Craig, right behind her. She hugged me for a long time, and I cried into her shoulder, and she said, "Don't worry, Mom. I'm going to handle everything." I believed her. That is what a mother does. You believe your child even when something small and quiet inside you whispers to be careful. The first sign came 3 days before the funeral. Renee sat with me at my kitchen table with a folder of papers. She said they were standard estate documents. She said Bernard had mentioned wanting things organized. She said the house would be complicated to keep up alone and that she and Craig had talked it over, and they were willing to take on the responsibility. I was still in the fog that comes with fresh grief. I had not slept more than 2 hours at a time. I had eaten half a bowl of soup the day before, and felt proud of that. My brain was thick and slow, and Renee was talking fast, the way she always did when she wanted something she was not sure she deserved. She said, "It's just 1 page, Mom. It protects you. It means you don't have to stress about taxes and upkeep and all of that." I said I wanted to read it. She said there was no time. The filing deadline was the following morning. She pointed to a line near the bottom and said my name was already printed there. She handed me a pen. I hesitated. I remember the hesitation clearly because I remember thinking, Bernard would not want me to sign anything without reading it. Bernard was a careful man. He read every contract twice. He taught me that. But Renee put her hand over mine and said, "Mom, I'm doing this for you. I love you." And I signed. I did not know what I had signed. She took the folder before I could ask again. She kissed my cheek. She said she would see me at the funeral home in the morning. That night I could not sleep. I sat in Bernard's chair in the living room and stared at the window and thought about the way she had moved that folder, the speed of it, the efficiency, and I thought about something Craig had said to me 6 months ago, half joking but not really, that a house like ours was worth real money in today's market. Craig sold insurance and was not very good at it. He drove a car that was 2 years older than it should have been for a man who talked about money the way he did. He and Renee had a mortgage on a townhouse across town that I knew from Renee's own complaints was difficult to manage. I pushed the thoughts down because she was my daughter. You push things down for your children. You have been doing it for 40 years and you do not even notice anymore. At the funeral, Renee stood beside me and held my hand. She wore a beautiful black dress and people told her she looked like me when I was young, and she smiled and squeezed my hand and I thought maybe I had been wrong. Maybe she really was just trying to help. Then came the reception. Then came the glass of wine and the smile and the 43 people and the words I had not agreed to. When the woman in the grey blazer stood up, Renee's expression shifted through 3 different versions of herself in less than 5 seconds. Surprised, angry, calculating. Then she settled on the 4th version, the one she had always been best at. Composed, wronged, patient. "I'm sorry," Renee said, tilting her head in the direction of the woman. "I don't believe we've met." "We haven't," the woman said. "My name is Patricia Lawson. I'm an estate attorney. I was Bernard's attorney, actually. He contacted me 8 weeks ago." The room's silence deepened. Renee's chin lifted slightly. Craig, who had been standing near the food table with a plate he was no longer eating from, went very still. Renee said, "My father never mentioned an attorney to me," Patricia said. "He specifically did not mention it to you. He asked me not to." Every head in the room turned. I felt the weight of it. All those eyes, and underneath the shock I felt something else beginning. A small, stubborn thing waking up. Renee set her wine glass down with a controlled click. "This is inappropriate," she said, her voice soft with the particular softness that means the opposite. "My mother just buried her husband this morning. Whatever you think you need to say, I would appreciate it if you waited until—" "Your mother signed a document 2 days ago that she did not read," Patricia said. She was not loud. She did not need to be. The document she signed was not a standard estate form. It was a deed transfer. It would have given you full legal ownership of the family home, eliminating your mother's residency rights. Effective 60 days from signing. Someone at the far table said, "What?" and did not bother to whisper it. Craig moved from the food table. He walked toward Patricia with the tight stride of a man pretending to be calm. "You can't come in here and make accusations like this," he said. "This is a private gathering. We're grieving." Patricia looked at him the way you look at a small problem you have already solved. "I'm not making accusations," she said. "I'm stating facts. I have a copy of the document your wife presented to Eleanor 2 days ago, and I have a copy of the will Bernard Hayes filed with my office 6 weeks ago. They are not compatible." Renee turned to me then, and this is the part that I still think about at night. She did not look scared. She looked strategic. She looked at me like she was deciding something. Then she walked toward me slowly, and her voice dropped into something soft and private that was still absolutely designed to be heard. "Mum," she said, "I don't know what this woman has told you, but I want you to know that everything I've done has been for you. You can't manage that house alone. You said so yourself last winter. You said it felt too big. I was trying to take care of you. Last winter I had said the house felt quiet, not too big." She knew the difference. She had always known the difference. I looked at my daughter. I looked at her the way you look at something you have been looking at for so long you stopped seeing it clearly. And I saw her. Not the little girl with the gap in her front teeth. Not the teenager who burned toast every Saturday and laughed about it. I saw the woman who had come to my house 3 days after my husband died with a folder and a pen and a story about protecting me. I said, "Renee, I want to hear what she has to say." My daughter blinked. It was fast. Then her face reset. "Fine," she said, and stepped back. Patricia waited until there was a quiet confirmation that the room was listening. Then she spoke in a tone that was clear and unhurried, the way someone speaks when they have done this before and know the importance of being understood. "Bernard Hayes came to my office in October," she said. He was concerned. He had noticed things over the previous year. Financial conversations with Craig that he had not been included in. Questions from Renee about the property value. A visit from a man he did not recognize, who had introduced himself as a business partner of Craig's. I had not known about that man. A business partner, Patricia continued. Bernard updated his will and asked me to monitor the situation discreetly. He was not ready to confront his daughter. He wanted to protect Eleanor without causing a family rupture if he could help it. He was a careful man. My chest tightened. Bernard, sitting with this woman he had never mentioned, trying to protect me quietly from something he could not quite name yet. After his death, Patricia said, I was notified by the hospital, as Bernard had arranged. I began monitoring the situation. When I learned of the document Renee presented to Eleanor 2 days ago, I obtained a copy through a contact in the county recorder's office, where it had already been filed. Already filed, I repeated. My own voice surprised me. It came out steady. She already filed it? Patricia looked at me. Yes, Eleanor. The day after you signed it. The room broke open in noise. Two of Bernard's colleagues stood up. The woman from our church covered her mouth. Renee said something sharp to Craig in a voice too low to hear, and Craig straightened his jacket and stared at the door like he was measuring the distance to it. "That is not possible," Renee said, turning back to the room with her hands open. "I don't know what this woman is trying to do, but this is not the time or place. Craig, call our lawyer." Craig reached for his phone. His hand was not entirely steady. Patricia said, "You're welcome to call your attorney. I would also suggest you call him about the other matter." Craig stopped. Renee said, "What other matter?" Patricia looked at her without any pleasure in it. "The business arrangement with Martin Voss." The name meant nothing to me, but it meant something to Craig. The colour left his face so fast I watched it happen, like someone had pulled a plug. Renee noticed. She looked at her husband and her voice changed. "Craig, what is Martin Voss?" Craig did not answer. Patricia spoke carefully. "Martin Voss is a private lender. He operates in the grey area between legitimate finance and something that the State Attorney General's office has been examining for 14 months. Craig took a significant loan from him approximately 10 months ago to cover business losses." I sat very still. 10 months ago, around the time Renee started calling me more often about the house, asking how I was managing, whether I had thought about downsizing. "The loan," Patricia said, "was secured against future assets. Assets that Craig represented he had access to." Renee turned to her husband fully now. "What assets?" she said. "Craig." His jaw moved. He looked at me, then at the floor. "It was supposed to be temporary," he said. "I was going to fix it. Fix it with my mother's house," Renee said. It was not a question. The room was watching a marriage crack open in real time. People were not looking at Patricia anymore. They were watching Renee realize something she had either not known or had chosen not to know. I thought about her face when she came to my kitchen with the folder. The speed, the urgency, the filing deadline that apparently could not wait one single day, and I wondered how much she had known. I wondered if she had told herself she was protecting me, or if she had always known she was protecting Craig. A mother asks herself that question differently than a stranger would. A mother wonders if she failed somewhere. If she raised someone who could do this, what had she missed? I did not ask it for long, because Renee turned to me then, and her face was different now. The composure was gone. What was left was something I recognized from when she was 15 and had broken my mother's china dish and tried to make it my fault. "Mom," she said, "if you had just stayed out of it, if you had just let me handle things, none of this would be happening." There it was. I said, "You came to my home 3 days after your father died and asked me to sign away my house." She said, "I was trying to protect it." "From me?" She pressed her lips together. "Renee," I said, and my voice was quiet, the way tired is quiet. Not scared, just done. "I gave you everything I had. I worked for 32 years. I stayed up with you when you were sick. I drove you to practice and competitions, and every place you needed to be. I believed in you when nobody else saw what I saw, and 3 days after I lost your father, you put a pen in my hand and rushed me past the part where I could think." The room was absolutely silent. "I am not going to pretend that did not happen," I said. "Not for you. Not for Craig. Not for anyone in this room." Renee's eyes filled. The tears looked real. They may have been real. But I had learned something in those 3 days that I should have understood much sooner. My daughter crying was not the same as my daughter being sorry. Craig said, "This is being blown out of proportion." His voice had the careful quality of a man trying to sound reasonable while standing on ice. "Eleanor, we were going to make sure you were comfortable. We were going to take care of the property. You weren't going to lose anything." Patricia said. She was going to lose the legal right to live in her own home. Craig turned to her. "We are a family. We would never have put Eleanor out." Patricia said, "The document doesn't reference family goodwill. It references legal ownership. And legal ownership, once transferred, is not undone by goodwill." I had not known that. I had not known that a signature on one piece of paper could make 41 years of a life disappear into someone else's name. Patricia looked at me. "Bernard knew," she said quietly. "That's why he came to me. He was worried about exactly this. He loved Renee. He did not want to believe it was intentional, but he wanted you protected regardless." Bernard, sitting in a lawyer's office, probably wearing his good blue sweater, trying to build a wall around me before he was gone. He had known he was running out of time. I pressed my hand flat against my chest and just breathed. One of Bernard's colleagues, a man named Walter who had worked with my husband for 20 years, stood up. He pointed at Craig and said, "I want to know if my name is anywhere on any of this, because Bernard mentioned you to me." He was worried and I brushed it off, and I'm not brushing it off now. 2 other people stood up asking questions. The woman from our church had her phone out. Renee made a sound that was half argument and half something breaking inside her. Craig said to her, fast and low, "Do not say anything else." She pulled her arm away from him. Patricia moved toward me through the crowd that was shifting and murmuring. She crouched slightly so we were at eye level and said, "Eleanor, I know this is a terrible day to also have to deal with this. I'm sorry. But the filing had already happened, and if we waited, you did the right thing," I said. "Bernard would have wanted you to." She nodded. "The deed transfer can be contested and reversed. Bernard's will is clear and filed. We have the document you signed, and the circumstances under which you signed it are going to matter. You didn't sign freely. You signed under grief and pressure and incomplete information." She paused. "That's not a valid signature, Eleanor." I looked at my hands. 67 years old, a retired English teacher, a widow of 2 days, and apparently the owner of a deed problem I did not know I had until 40 minutes ago. "What about this Martin Voss?" I asked. Patricia's expression shifted slightly. "Voss is Craig's problem. The loan was secured on representations that were not accurate. We are not responsible for what Craig told him. But if Craig can't pay him," I said slowly, "then Craig has a problem with Martin Voss," she said. "Not you. Is Voss dangerous?" Patricia considered her answer. "He operates in uncomfortable territory. But he's not someone who comes after mothers. He comes after the people who owe him." She looked toward Craig. Craig owes him. Craig, across the room, was on his phone now, speaking quietly with his back to everyone. Renee stood 3 feet away from him, not touching him, looking at the tablecloth. Something in me felt very strange. I had expected to feel worse. I had spent 4 years watching Bernard's health decline and bracing myself for the grief that would follow, and the grief had arrived right on schedule, and it was as terrible as I had imagined. But I had not expected to be sitting in the middle of a reception for my husband's funeral, discovering that my daughter had tried to take my home while I was still numb from the loss of him. And yet, there was something underneath the terrible that I did not have a word for at first. I sat with it for a moment, while Patricia answered a question from Walter, and then I recognized it. It was the same feeling I had the night before when I sat in Bernard's chair and stared at the window and thought about the folder and the speed of the pen and the way Renee had moved it. It was the feeling of knowing something without wanting to know it, and the specific, exhausted relief of finally not having to pretend you didn't. 2 weeks after the reception, I sat in Patricia's office, and she walked me through what had happened and what was going to happen next. The deed transfer was being challenged on the grounds of undue influence. Bernard's will, which was clear and properly witnessed, established that the house was mine without condition. The document Renee had me sign was, in Patricia's words, exactly the kind of document designed to look like nothing while being everything. Craig had retained an attorney and said very little publicly. His situation with Martin Voss was, according to Patricia's contact at the AG's office, an active matter that did not involve me, and never should have been allowed to come this close to involving me. Renee called me twice. I let both calls go to voicemail. The first message was an explanation. The second was an apology of sorts. The kind that explains why the thing happened more than it acknowledges that the thing should not have happened. I listened to both of them in Bernard's chair with a cup of tea that went cold while I sat with it. I did not call her back. Not that week. What I did instead was walk into every room of my house and open every curtain. I walked to the backyard and looked at the garden Bernard and I had planted together. The roses, he said, were too much work, and then spent every weekend tending with more care than he would admit. I sat on the back porch in the cold November air with my coffee and I breathed. This was my house, my name, my life, my 41 years. Nobody had taken it yet, and they were not going to. 3 months later, I heard from Renee properly. Not a phone call, a letter, handwritten, which surprised me because Renee had not written anything by hand since she was in school. The handwriting looked like she had started over more than once. She wrote that she had known about Craig's debt. Not all of it, not the scope of it, but enough. She had told herself it was temporary. She had told herself that taking over management of the house was different from taking the house. She wrote that she understood now that it was not different, and that she was not sure how she had believed otherwise, except that she had wanted to believe it because the alternative was admitting that she had let Craig put her in a position where she was willing to hurt me. She did not ask me to forgive her. She said she understood if I didn't. I read the letter 4 times. I put it in the drawer where Bernard kept his important papers, next to the folder where I now kept a copy of his will, and Patricia's contact information, and the original challenging documents. Not because I treasured it exactly, because it was true. And Bernard always said you keep the things that are true even when they are hard. Craig and Renee separated in January. Craig was dealing with the situation with Martin Voss, through his attorney, and apparently through the AG's office, which had taken a significant interest in Voss's lending practices across 3 counties. That was not my problem or my story. I mention it only because Renee told me in her letter that losing Craig had not been the hardest part of the winter. The hardest part was understanding that she had chosen to protect his financial situation over her own mother's safety, and that she had called it love while she was doing it. I understood that kind of self-deception more than I wanted to admit. I had practiced my own version of it for years every time I excused something Renee did that bothered me, every time I pressed something down, every time I said to myself, "She is stressed. She is busy. She means well." Meaning well is not the same as doing right. Bernard told me that once about a different situation entirely, and I had stored it away without knowing I would need it this much. In the spring, I called Renee. She picked up on the first ring and went very quiet when she heard my voice. The way you go quiet when something you have been waiting for finally arrives, and you are afraid to breathe in case it disappears. I told her I was not ready to pretend nothing had happened. I told her the house conversation would take time. I told her that trust, once broken the way ours had been broken, does not come back on anyone's schedule. And then I told her I was not done with her, that she was still my daughter, that I had not stopped loving her even on the worst day of the worst month of my life. But that love from now on was going to be honest, which meant I was going to say when something was wrong, and I expected the same from her, and there would be no more folders with fast pens and filing deadlines. She said okay. She said she understood. She said she was going to try. We did not make any promises beyond that. Some things you cannot promise in advance. You can only show up and see. On a Sunday in April, I stood at the back of a room again. Not the reception hall from November. A community centre across town, where the County Legal Aid Office holds quarterly workshops on estate planning and elder rights. Patricia had asked if I would be willing to speak for a few minutes about my experience. I had said yes, after thinking about it for 2 weeks. The room held about 60 people, mostly older women. Some of them had come with daughters. Some had come alone. I stood at the front with no notes because Bernard had always told me the best things you say are the things you know well enough not to need notes for. I said, "A year ago I buried my husband, and that same week my daughter put a pen in my hand and I signed something I did not read because I was grieving and she was rushing and I trusted her. I said it not to condemn her, but to tell the truth, because the truth is the only thing I have now that I know is entirely mine." The room was very quiet. I said, "There will be people in your life who use your trust against you. Sometimes they are strangers. Sometimes they are the people you love most, acting out of desperation or selfishness or both, which is sometimes the same thing. And the moment they put a pen in your hand and stand over you, something in you will say, 'Wait, listen to that.'" I looked at the women closest to the front. I said, "You are not obligated to protect someone else's mistake at the cost of your own life. You are not obligated to sign. You are not obligated to be silent because silence feels like loyalty. Bernard left me protected not because he doubted me, but because he loved me enough to plan for the worst while hoping for better. Give yourself the same gift. Talk to someone. Write things down. Ask questions. Read every line." I paused. I said, "I was a high school English teacher for 32 years. I taught my students to read carefully because words matter. Then I went home and stopped reading carefully because it was my daughter. That is the irony I have to live with, but I am living with it in my own house, in Bernard's garden, with the roses he said were too much work." A woman in the 3rd row laughed, a warm sound. A few others did too. I said, "Your name is yours. Your signature is yours. Your house, your life, your story. Be careful who you let touch it, and if someone has already touched it without your full understanding, it is not too late. It is almost never too late. Pick up the phone. Call someone like Patricia. Call anyone. Just don't stay quiet because you think love requires it. I walked back to my seat. Patricia was standing near the wall with her coffee, and she gave me a small nod. I nodded back. That evening I sat on my back porch in the April cold with a sweater pulled around me and looked at the roses. They were starting to come back. The first green at the base of each cane, stubborn and ordinary, and exactly where they were supposed to be. I thought about Bernard in a lawyer's office in October. Careful as always, planning 2 steps ahead. Loving me without making a speech about it. I thought about Renee's letter in the drawer. The starting over handwriting. I thought about the reception hall in November, the woman in the grey blazer standing up, 43 people, and a room going silent. I have been asked since then whether I was angry that day, whether I felt humiliated, whether I wanted revenge on the people who had tried to use my grief against me. The honest answer is that I felt all of those things, and none of them were the largest thing. The largest thing was something quieter. It was the moment Patricia looked at me across that room and I felt seen again. Not as a widow, not as a problem, not as a woman who was too overwhelmed to manage things and needed someone to handle it for her. As Eleanor Hayes, 67 years old, retired English teacher, a woman who had read every contract in her marriage except the one her daughter put in front of her on the worst week of her life. A woman who was still here, still in her house, still standing. You do not need to be the loudest person in the room to protect yourself. You do not need to make a scene or shout, or be someone you are not. You only need to be willing to say, when it matters, I did not agree to this. I am not going to stay silent. I am going to tell the truth, even if it is uncomfortable for everyone in the room, including the people I love. That is not revenge. That is just a woman, finally deciding that her name means something, and mine, at last, was still mine. If this story stayed with you, please like and subscribe. Leave a comment and tell me whether you would have spoken up in that room, because sometimes the most important stories are the ones that remind us we are allowed to.